All right. So the next thing we're looking at, guys, is I just really wanted to talk about this point, evaluating the effectiveness of health promotion programs. A lot of this you already know. We have discussed how you can evaluate a program in Unit 3 or Unit 4. Thing is that when we did the questions in the SAC, and even in the past when Vika have asked questions about health promotion programs, they sometimes just ask you to evaluate it in terms of Ottawa Charter or social model. And often that's clear in the question. So it'll say something like, explain how two principles of the social model are evident in the program. I just wanted to really mention the point that sometimes Vika may not include that explicit instruction. They may not say, they might give you a scenario of a program, and they might not necessarily say, evaluate this program in relation to two principles of the social model that are reflected. So they may not give you that explicit instruction. So that's why I thought it's really important for you guys. We go through health promotion programs across the board. We do it in Unit 3, we do it in Unit 4 as well. In Unit 4, it's more so like case studies and scenarios of programs in low-income countries and stuff, but they're still programs at the end of the day. So it's really important for us to know that if we are asked to evaluate how effective a program is, whether that's a program you've memorized from home, like the QUIP program or that program from Chapter 13 that you've chosen, or it's a program Vika give you in a case study or a scenario, you need to know what do you need to link back to, or what's the basic things that Vika would expect you to link back to. You don't need to link back to all of these, by the way, but these are the bare minimum things for you to get those marks, okay? Number one, you can link back to the actual results that the program has achieved in terms of any health outcomes or improvements to health status indicators. So this could be, for example, if it's a program about quit, which most of us have already memorized, you could talk about how the establishment of the QUIP program has led to a decreased prevalence in lung cancer in the past 2 decades. Okay, that is a clear result that the program has achieved in terms of improvements in health status indicators. Or you could say the mortality rates as a result of lung cancer have decreased significantly since the implementation of the QUIP program. Again, a clear link to health status indicator that has been achieved. You don't have to necessarily link back to that, though. You could even link back to any action areas that are evident from the Ottawa Charter in that program that you've been given or that you're talking about. So with reference to QUIT, we already know, let's pretend it's a program about, increasing knowledge about nutrition in young people. Okay, if that program or that scenario makes reference to the fact that the canteens in the schools that these young people go to are now not selling soft drinks anymore, you could link that easily back to Build Healthy Public Policy, that these schools have now made a policy that they're not going to sell sugar sweetened soft drinks anymore. They might sell juice, or they might sell something that's a little bit more like no sugar based, or like they might sell, I don't know, sparkling water or something like that. Okay, so that's the idea. So we're linking back to any of the action areas of the Ottawa Charter. Similarly, if you want to talk about the effectiveness of the program, you can talk about how that program reflects the principles of the social model of health that are achieved. So if that program, for example, using the same example of the soft drinks and not selling soft drinks at the canteen, we can also link that back to empowering individuals and the community, because by ensuring that, these kind of settings that these people are in are supporting them, we're basically able to empower these people to feel confident in making healthier choices because they're kind of guided towards that path, as opposed to not having any kind of confidence to do that. So again, you can link back to those principles. Finally, and this might be one that surprises maybe some of you, if you are evaluating a program in Unit 3, if it's a Unit 3 related program related to smoking or obesity or, alcohol use or something that we cover in Unit 3, you can actually link back to OFIT. You can actually link back to those 4 features or one or more of those features from Unit 4. Okay, that's not just something that we only need to reserve for Unit 4 related programs about sustainability or poverty or gender equality. We can actually use that to evaluate programs in Unit 3 as well. And that's why I made a note there that Vika do accept this when you are evaluating Unit 3 programs. And they've mentioned this in their assessment reports, I think last year and the year before. So just something to think about, guys. When you get those questions that ask you to evaluate how effective a program is, a lot of you sometimes go very generic with it, but this is a way that you can stay specific and that you can ensure that you don't lose those marks. Can you use the Ottawa Charter or principles? Yeah, For Unit 3, you can definitely, in fact, I think the Ottawa Charter action areas and principles of social model of health are more so relevant for Unit 3 than for Unit 4. Because Unit 3 has more of a focus on health promotion as an actual concept, whereas Unit 4 is more about global health, I guess. Yeah. Okay, just some advice for data analysis, just things we've been saying all year round. If a question asks you to refer to make reference to include, or to incorporate the data, for the love of God, include the numerical data in your answer, okay? If you do not, you will get a 0, especially when the question is so clear and clearly says that you need to include it, okay? Similarly, if there's part B of that question requires you to give some explanation that required part A, and in part A you haven't given the data, you run the risk of losing the marks for the rest of that question as well. So just be careful there. Also, read and interpret the data accurately, okay? I remember sometimes when we're doing questions in class, a lot of you are so accustomed to thinking that the y-axis always has a percentage on it. You know, even when we do like life expectancy data, you'd be like, oh, like 25%, not 25%, sorry, you'd be like, oh, 75% instead of 75 years. So just be careful there. Always read the actual units that are given on that y-axis. Similarly, anything relating to rates, whether that's rates of disease, under 5 mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, any rate will be out of a certain number. So if you just write 70 deaths in your answer, without writing per 1,000 live births, you're automatically going to lose the marks there. You haven't interpreted the data correctly. Also, sometimes you may have to convert data before you write it in your actual answer. So if the graph on the x-axis or y-axis says something like Delhi's, and in brackets it's like apostrophe 000, that means Delhi's in the thousands range. So if it shows 55 Delhi's on the graph, you got to multiply that by 1,000 before you write in your answer 55,000 Delhi's. If you just write 55 Delhi's, that's wrong. You've, again, incorrectly interpreted the data. So always make an indication. Look at whether there's any brackets given to you there, anything that you need to convert before you write it in your actual answer on the paper. Also, make sure, a lot of you do this already, so this is something that's pretty straightforward, but make sure that you do use words that indicate a clear trend or a clear difference. So increasing, decreasing, significantly higher, slightly lower. All of those words will allow you to make a more specific comparison in terms of the data. Also, the last one, if you get a weird looking set of data, and I know we've come across our fair share of weird looking sets of data this year, don't panic. VCA are always going to throw in one bit of data that doesn't look like something you've seen before, or it looks confusing at first glance, okay? They haven't done that to trick you. They just want to test how you interpret that data, okay? It won't be something that you're going to need a maths degree to interpret. It's not something that, oh, you got to do specialist maths to interpret this data. No, okay? Just look at it a few times, carefully analyze all the axes, and a lot of the clues as to what that data is telling you are usually given in the information in the caption, okay? Right above the question or right below the question. So read everything around it. And this is where reading time really helps a lot. So if you come across a weird data and you're like, what is that? Then you can actually use a little bit extra of your reading time to simply decipher what that data is trying to tell you, okay? And that's fine. As I said before, even if you don't get to go through the whole paper in reading time, it's not the end of the world, okay? If it allows you to better get a sense of what this weird data is telling you, use the time to do that, because like I said, once your writing time starts, you basically hit the ground running. There's no time to really spend 20 minutes looking at a piece of data. So use your reading time wisely in that sense. Alrighty, talking about the extended response question. Extended response question, VCA can't really make up their mind about how many marks. Some years it's been out of 8, some years it's been out of 10. I think I've put the averages out of 10 for some reason for all of them, but I think in 2019 it was out of, no, 2018 was out of 8, I think, one year, one or two of those years. Either way, you can see that the average score is really low each year. Okay, in 2020 it was 1.9 out of 10. Like, that's really bad. Last year was slightly okay, 2.6, but that's still well below the passing mark or the passing range. There are many reasons for this. Number one, students leave the whole extended response question blank. That's the most common reason, automatic 0. Some students attempt it, but they don't include any stimulus material. So they don't quote anything from the sources. They don't quote any kind of data. Some students do include stimulus material, but they only talk about each source in isolation. So they dedicate one paragraph to just talk about source one, and they don't make any kind of links or connections between the data. Okay. that will automatically cause you to lose marks. And Bika have said that a lot of the lower scoring responses tried to make an attempt to answer the question, but didn't make the necessary or sufficient links or connections between the sources of data. I'll talk about how you can make a link between data very soon. A question, would you recommend doing this question first? Look, I don't know, actually, to be honest. It depends on how you've been doing your trial exams. If you've been doing your trial exams in a format that you do the extended response question first and then work around all the other ones after, I guess that's okay. Okay, if you feel like you've got the most energy and the most, ability to do this one first and just get it out of the way, you can. But it's always good to test whether that works for you first before you actually go ahead and do it for the real exam. So yeah, I'm not sure. As I said, like when I attempted, like when we had exams, like I would just do it in the typical order. But if it's something that's worked for you, then you can obviously go ahead and do it. Yeah. And the last reason why a lot of people lose marks, or one of the reasons why it's such a low average score, is because students don't make links to what the question is actually asking. Okay, and that's another issue with these kinds of questions. And we'll talk about making links back to these indicators and these key concepts very soon. So just some general tips, guys, for the 10-mark question or for the 8-mark question, whatever it's going to be this year. This is what Bika have said from their assessment reports. Okay, so basically what they've said is that most of the students who attempted the 10-mark question gained some marks. What that means is that students who put in a basic level of effort, who actually attempted the question, it doesn't say students who exceeded expectations or student who excelled in the question. It just says students who attempted, gained some marks. Okay, might not be 10 out of 10, but it's still something. Don't leave it blank. Write something. Okay, you will get marks for writing something. Okay, even if it isn't the best thing, you might still get 1 or 2. That's still almost above average. Okay, almost reaching that average mark there. You must integrate stimulus material from the 3 sources as evidence into your response. Similar to how you'd weave in quotes for an English essay as evidence, you're going to weave in the actual data from those 3 sources. Okay, and remember that data is not always numerical. Sometimes it's in the form of a case study. You might just quote a phrase or a sentence or a word from that case study. Okay. This is really vital for you to get good marks. So for you to basically get anything more than a 2 out of 10, you need to quote that stimulus material and that data. Do you recommend that we add the dimensions and health status even if not asked? If you're not asked to really think, it's just a waste of time to add it in. So just do what the question is asking. Generally, they will always ask you to link back to either health and well-being or health status or health outcomes anyway. But if they haven't asked you to do that and they've asked you to do something else, like evaluate one of the sources, it's better you evaluate the source as opposed to just randomly make links there to dimensions of health and well-being or health status indicators. So only do that if you're specifically asked to do that. You should aim to quote or integrate material from each source to make sure your answer is balanced. So don't just only talk about source 1 and source 2 and completely forget about source 3 or vice versa. So try to make sure that you've got a balanced answer there. In addition, like I said before, try your best to make as many links or connections between the sources as possible, as this is what will take your response from a kind of medium level where you're getting like maybe a 4 or a 5 out of 10 to like an 7 or 8 out of 10. Okay, that is the difference between a very medium to a very high kind of score on the 10 marker or extended response question. What do we mean by making links or connections? What we mean is if in source 1 you've got like a graph that shows you like obesity rates in Australia, and in source 3 you've got like a case study about a person who's obese, who is now so obese that they have to access NDIS because their obesity has rendered them handicapped or disabled. You can easily make links. You can talk about the fact that the graph in source 1 depicts the increasing obesity rates in Australia from, I don't know, I'm just making this up, 1990 to 2020. Okay. These increasing obesity rates are clearly reflected in the case study of Tom in source 3, who over the past decade has gradually been putting on weight and has come to a state where he is now considered to have a high BMI or is morbidly obese. So you're kind of making a link there. It's not an amazing link because I just came up with that example, but it's still a link where you're combining how two different sources have some kind of common thread. Okay. And remember, Vika will choose those 3 sources to ensure that even the most basic links can be made in terms of identifying what that common thread is or what that common link could be, okay, in terms of similarities. So you're not going to get very difficult sources there. There will be sources where you can make the links. It's just that you got to use a little bit of your extra brain strength and energy to make those links apparent. And again, reading time is really helpful for that as well. Now, marks are given for structure, clarity, and coherence. Just like in psychology in the 10 marker, we do look at organization of response. Same thing for health. This is where using subheadings, using paragraphs, addressing those main things that the question is asking is really important. Okay. When you get that question in writing time, highlight what are the 3 main things that you need to address, because it's usually 2 or 3 main things that Vika asks you to address in that 10 mark or extended response question anyway. Highlight them and turn them into subheadings. And each of those subheadings would be like maybe 1 paragraph. Okay. And that will allow you to more easily manage that 10 mark question, as opposed to being like, oh my God, it's a 10 marker, it's an essay. It's not an essay. Okay. And on that note, you're not going to waste time with fancy introductions or conclusions or topic sentences, because it is not an essay. It's not an English essay. It's just an extended response question. Okay. So that's the extended response. Don't stress too much about it. Just think of it as a bigger version of a normal short answer question that's in the rest of your exam. Okay, last thing that we're up to now is linking back to the keywords that we use in health. Okay, if you're asked in a question to link back to health and well-being, you're linking back to dimensions, any of the PMS dimensions there. If you're asked to link back to health status, you're linking back to your indicators. The most common ones that a lot of you always mention: morbidity, mortality, prevalence, life expectancy. Now, burden of disease is its own thing. So if you're asked to link back to health status, avoid linking back to DALY, YLL, or YLD. That's its own thing as per Vika's definition. So don't bring up burden of disease, DALY, YLL, or YLD under health status if you're being asked to link back to an indicator. As per, if we actually look at the study design, burden of disease is bundled under the different health status indicators as one group. But for the purposes of linking back to it in questions, use the other indicators like morbidity, mortality, incidence, prevalence, HAIL, life expectancy. Okay. Some of the other health status indicators a lot of you tend to neglect or not use, but are still accepted by Vika, include self-assessed health status, literacy rates, and birth rates, which are more relevant for Unit 4. Health, if the question simply says, explain how peace influences health, or explain how peace influences health outcomes, this is where you have a choice. This is where you can link either back to the dimensions of health and well-being, which are your PMS, or you can link back to the health status indicators. So I really love questions where they ask like health outcomes, because you actually have a choice. You can kind of play to your strengths there. Burden of disease, you can link back to YLL or YLD. You can actually also just link back to the more generic measure, which is DALY. Okay. But a lot of you, what you've been doing in the SACs is you've been linking to the specific ones of YLL or YLD, which is actually better because it allows you to unpack more from that response. On that note, if you do mention YLL or YLD, just make sure you mention which one is fatal and which one is non-fatal, because that's really important for you, for your assessor to know that you know the difference between the two. If you're linking back to DALYs, you're just linking back to, so I'll give you an example. If I'm saying, explain how high BMI contributes to increased burden of disease in Australia. If I just want to link back to DALY, I might say something like, having a high BMI means having excess body weight, which is associated with increased pain in the joints because of the person carrying the excess body weight. And that contributes to an increased DALYs with reference to arthritis and musculoskeletal conditions. So you're not actually linking back to the non-fatal component or the pain and suffering. You're just linking back to the increased burden of disease that disease brings up as in general. For the health outcomes, can you write both health and well-being and health? Yeah. So Vika have specified in their assessment reports that for health outcomes, you can either talk about both health and well-being, both health status indicators, or you can talk one health status indicator, one health and well-being. It's totally up to you. Can we write just YLL in our answer, or do we have to write the full word? I think you can write YLL just by itself, but again, just mention that's fatal burden. So YLL, which is the fatal burden of disease. So If you're not going to say years of life lost, just indicate that it's fatal burden of disease, and you should be fine, because I think YLL is an abbreviation used in the study design. So those are generally approved as well. Human development, you're linking back to a specific aspect or keyword of the human development definition. So access to knowledge, develop to full potential, all of those. I'll show you a little picture from the whiteboard we took ages ago for that as well in the next slide. And when you're asked to link back to SDG 3, a lot of you already do this, and we've tried to drill that into your head this year as well. You're linking back to a key feature of SDG 3. So you're linking back to either maternal and child health and well-being, you're linking to communicable disease, or you're linking back to non-communicable disease. And the best thing, guys, is when you're linking back to these specific key features, try to link back to a specific example of a disease or condition that falls under that particular key feature or category. So as opposed to just saying, SDG 5, gender equality, can affect SDG 3, because in countries where women are treated, in an abusive way and where there's less gender equality, women are more likely to experience, traumatic births, because obviously maybe their husbands don't care enough to take them to a proper, birthing facility or clinic. As opposed to just saying, they will experience a traumatic birth, try to link that back to an actual condition. So try to say women are more likely to experience hemorrhage as a result of their husbands neglecting them and not taking them to a proper birthing facility where a proper birthing procedure could take place. So if you're linking back to communicable disease, don't just link back to increased infections or viruses within the community. Link it back to HIV/AIDS or malaria. Link it back to the name of a specific condition. Okay, that will make your answer all the more specific and less generic. Okay. For what questions do we need to go into depth on how the diseases are caused? Those are the questions where you're asked to explain how one of the risk factors can increase, increased burden of disease or health status. So for example, how does the use of alcohol or how does high BMI contribute to increased burden of disease? So you might then talk about the fact that a high BMI can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, especially if the person is consuming a diet that's high in saturated fats. So that's where you then have to talk about the biological, like LDL cholesterol will increase in their body, and that can lead to the formation of plaques within the arteries, which can then contribute to things like a heart attack or a stroke. Yeah. It's usually when you're asked to link back to burden of disease or health status, that's when you bring in the specific disease that connects to that risk factor. What's hemorrhage? Hemorrhage is basically excessive uncontrolled bleeding that often occurs when you don't have like sterile birthing procedures in place, often occurring in places where it's not actual midwives or trained medical staff that are doing the delivery of the baby. Okay, so this is the picture of the board I was talking about. It's just literally human development. It's just stuff that's already in that definition that we've all learned. Develop to full potential, lead productive, creative lives, enhance capabilities, access to knowledge. It's good to try to remember as many of them as you can, just because you don't know which one you might use in which kind of case study, in which kind of scenario. So if you know more of them, you basically have more scope and more choice as to which one you're actually going to incorporate into your answer. So that's why I say it's always better to know as many as you can. Some of them are just 2 or 3 words. So I think some of them you can kind of remember. As in terms of like, do you need to know them word to word? You need to know them almost close word to word, like I'd say 85 to 90% exact. If it doesn't, because a lot of the time your VCA assessors and even us as your teachers, like we are primed to look for those things. Like I want to see develop to full potential in your answer. I want to see expanding people's choices. If you word that in your own words, that doesn't kind of pop out to me in your answer when I'm actually looking at your answer. Okay, so VCA assessors are told to actually look out for these specific words. And even if you read any of the top scoring, high scoring answers in the past VCA assessment reports, you'll notice that those students who've written those answers have actually clearly written exactly how they come up in the definition. Lead productive, creative lives, not lead good lives, for example. Expand people's choices, not increase people's opportunities. So it's obviously exactly as it's shown in the definition. So try to learn it exactly as well. A specific strength of the HDI or Human Development Index is that you can use it as a single point of reference. It's a single statistic that provides us with an idea or insight into a country's social and economic development. And for that reason, it's a single statistic that we can easily use to compare one country's social and economic development to another country's social and economic development. Just like we use life expectancy as a single statistical figure to basically understand how long one person in one country is living compared to a person in another country. Similar thing with the HDI. Oh, that's the end. Okay, cool. I thought we had more to cover, but actually that's it. Alrighty, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording here.